Good afternoon. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. I'm here with Assemblyman David Buchwald to share with you a report that was compiled by Assemblyman Buchwald and some recommendations that deal with the incidents that we've had dealing with utility companies as recently as last week, but going back to the incidents that happened in March that affected us both, Edison and NYSEG, and all throughout the county, which was affected. Let me just introduce all the people that I've joined with. We have from left to right Ivy Poole, who is a town councilwoman in the town of Newcastle. We have Kevin Byrne, a state assemblyman from the northern part of the county. Mary Jane Shimsky, who's a county legislator from Hastings and the river towns. Assemblyman Buchwald, who you'll be hearing from. Deputy Supervisor of Mamaroneck Town, Jane L. Kindini. County Legislator Margaret Kunzio, who represents sort of the middle band of the county from the Hudson to the Connecticut border. Mayor Noam Bramson of New Rochelle. Mayor Josh Cohn of the city of Rye. We also have Mayor Dan Hockford from Scarsdale with us. Kevin Hansen, Supervisor of the town of Pound Ridge. County Legislator Kitley Koval. County Legislators Nancy Barr, Damon Marr, who am I missing? David Tubiolo is with us here. We have the Chief of Staff of the Board of Legislators, Dennis Power, and we have our Chief of Staff on our floor, Andrew Ferris. Have I missed any electeds? That's pretty good, I thought. Wasn't that pretty good? Not bad, you know?
As we expect, George.
We also have Mike Alter with us here from Nita Lowy's office. So, Mike, thank you for being with us. Today, you're going to see recommendations in a 49-page report outlining the utilities, activities, and the recommendations for improvement. Assemblyman David Buchwald took the bull by the horns and made an effort to pull together all of the individuals that had met from the different municipalities to try to sort through what the different experiences were that occurred for the March incidents. I assume, as we all know, Westchester County is served by two separate utilities. In round numbers, 3/4 of the county roughly is Con Edison, and the northern quarter of the county is served by NYSEG. There are some communities, Yorktown being one of them, that are served by both of them, depending on the geography of the town. There was a robust discussion of ideas and concerns. You heard certainly the complaints. You saw the more than famous video that friends who haven't seen me in 30 years got to see on TV when I was upset about what I saw at the time, what I thought was an inadequate response. But the overall gist of this report and of the response by elected officials at the town, city, village, and county level, and state officials as well, is not anger as much as it is anger that leads to action. We need to see change. We need to see something significant happen that's different. And going backwards is a function of understanding what happened and why, and then see action taken to change this. We know that Mother Nature will act without giving us sufficient advance notice, but we cannot expect that we will continue to have an inadequate response to Mother Nature when she does what she does. And there's a host of different things here that deal with the preparation of the utilities. David is going to speak to all of these things in much greater detail, just to outline some of the key points. What our communications function is expected from the utilities to the municipalities and the utilities to the individual residents. The mutual aid system, which has become a base of how the utilities respond on these things, and what in and of that system needs to be improved, and then the general question of infrastructure and operations, all the things that can be done in the period of time before the next crisis hits so that we can be better prepared from an infrastructure standpoint. But I compliment all of these local officials. I have served in every one of these positions as a local official and as a county legislator. Every one of them, both political parties at every level, did their very best by my observation. I traveled this county. I was in Kevin's shop in Pound Ridge on more than one occasion, and was up in Yorktown at the EOC, at the police station, and I saw local officials, elected officials and appointed officials who were doing their utmost for their residents. So now the question is, how do we channel what occurred into something better? And for that, I give you Assemblyman David Buchwald, who has pulled this together, and he will tell you about the methodology and what the key recommendations are. Assemblyman.
Thank you very much, Mr. County Executive, and thank you to all of you for being here and George for hosting. In fact, a lot of this effort got started with when the County Executive was kind enough to host a meeting, unprecedented in Westchester history, as far as I'm aware, of elected officials from all levels of government. Over 70 of us met at the county center. We held a press conference a little bit after that, so I know some of you were at that press conference, where we announced that we were forming a group called United Westchester. United Westchester is mayors, town supervisors, county officials, state officials, federal officials, all coming together on a bipartisan basis in recognition that having extended power outages like we've seen in Westchester County in recent years is totally unacceptable. We need for our economy, for our health and safety, a sense that everything possible will be done to restore power as quickly as can happen after these storms. And fundamentally, that is not what we saw in March. It's not what we saw after Superstorm Sandy, but it's also not what we saw last week in northern Westchester. And we really are committed to doing everything in our power collectively to make sure we don't see those sorts of things happen again. So we went from that meeting of over 70 officials to recognizing we need to put, in a very tangible sense, our thoughts down as to what elected officials' perspective was on what had happened in March. And we sent out a feedback form to every member of United Westchester, and over 30 of them filled out in very great detail their thoughts on 21 different subjects. Those are the 21 different subjects of this report, copies of which are available up front. And on those topics, you will see in this report, which is 49 pages, a whole slew of thoughts and ideas and feedback. We think this document will form the building block of responses not just by government officials, but also by the utilities themselves and the regulatory agencies like the Public Service Commission that we're submitting the document to, as to what the perspective is from those of us who should naturally be the partners of utility companies in getting things back and running. But fundamentally, our first responsibility is to the people we represent, and the people of Westchester are thoroughly dissatisfied with what has happened so far. So this document lays out a whole bunch of reactions on those different topics. You will see in the document the fact that across elected officials, we don't always agree on everything. We have different perspectives, sometimes because of different levels of government we represent, different types of communities, but sometimes also because something might have worked well in one town and didn't work well in another town. But we will get in this document is a in-depth understanding of what happened in March here in Westchester County. And we hope that the utility companies will view this as a useful document for feedback on their own performance. But frankly, we shall see whether they think this is useful or whether they think this is just folks trying to pile on. It is not piling on. Piling on would be just issuing a one-page press release. 49 pages is a thoroughly serious attempt to get the utility companies to change their practices and to recognize that many of the members of United Westchester are the folks who spent those storms coordinating DPWs, helping constituents, interfacing with many levels of government and government agencies. And we did everything we felt appropriate, and we thoroughly expect the utility companies to put up the same level of effort. And ultimately, you cannot come out reading this report and not think there's a lot more to be done. So we put together at the front of this report a series of what we're calling early recommendations. This isn't the full set of things that need to be done, but the things that were broad consensus-based ideas that come directly out of the report comments. Those recommendations span a range of areas, recommendations from everything from how utility companies should organize their conference calls with elected officials to how they need to thoroughly reevaluate the mutual aid system and organize their own internal communications. Because one thing we very much got a sense of was that one part of a utility would not know what another part of the utility knew, would not have an appreciation of what the situation was on the ground. We're hopeful that as we move forward from here, that these recommendations can be just the beginning of what changes things. And hopefully they'll be adopted voluntarily by utility companies, but if not, we'll be calling on the Public Service Commission to implement them regulatorily, or some of us as legislators and executives will try to implement them through law. But whatever system is set up, we need to get to a better place. And I want to thoroughly thank the array of officials that are behind me and that you'll see on this report. United Westchester has formed a 12-member executive committee. So as much as County Executive Latimer was very kind in praising me and my office, reality is you can't put together a report like this, first of all, without all the officials who participated in submitting their feedback, but second, having great eyes and ears helping us review this, make sure that it strikes the right tone. I think it very much does, but we'll leave that up to the people of Westchester as they review this report. We'll be posting it on my Assembly website. I'm sure the county will be making it available electronically as well, but suffice to say, copies are distributed here. Copies will be submitted to the Public Service Commission as part of their formal review. Westchester residents or anyone from New York can still comment through tomorrow electronically, following up on the Public Service Commission's hearings that were held in Westchester. But we're also sending this directly to the utility companies because we want their feedback. This is a genuine effort to really try to change things, and I thoroughly commend to all of you when you have copious amounts of free time to read 49 pages. But it will not put you to sleep, so it's not totally bedtime reading. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'm going to take questions in a second. They can be directed to David, myself, or actually any of our elected officials here who will be happy to talk about it. And if you'd like to do any one-on-one interviews with any of the officials that are here, they'll be available as soon as we finish the press conference. So you can talk about a particular experience in a particular municipality or at a different level of government. Just to repeat and sort of amplify these early recommendations, David has highlighted, he's taken the effort to pull them together, but very specific things. The Public Service Commission, as well as Con Ed and NYSEG, should perform an analysis of the ability to forecast the severity of future storms. That process, how they go about making that assessment, has to be analyzed, and the Public Service Commission has to make sure that as an oversight function, that forecast is happening so that we can better predict what might happen. Utility companies should have county, state, and federal officials participate in pre-storm conference calls. We have conference calls that happen once the storm is hit, but if we know this is coming and we hear that there's a severe weather situation coming, then there should be a pre-storm conference call. The Con Edison officials should reevaluate their intergovernmental conference calls. David made that point. We go through 2-hour phone calls where we go municipality by municipality. That system is long, drawn out. It requires individuals to be on the phone for quite a length of time, and there's most likely a way to change that process to make it more effective. Utility companies should revisit the practice of using robocalls to inform customers of their power status. We found that those calls were almost always inaccurate. They were general in nature. They did not accurately reflect what was happening on the ground. And that whole process, we understand that there's technology where you can mass communicate, and it may in fact be that kind of mass communication is disinformation if it's not accurate information. And this is a very important point that I think was brought out in this report. Both the utility companies and the Public Service Commission should rigorously reevaluate the functioning and reliance of the mutual aid system for power outage restorations. Mutual aid for this type of a situation leans on not having a fully staffed individual response team, and that you'll be able to call on other power companies in some proximity. But when you have regional storms that affect all of these communities, the mutual aid function comes from a distance. It comes from, in our cases, Canada or the Midwest or the South. And that is very different from mutual aid. When you hear the phrase used in fire departments, it's a very different thing. New Rochelle and Mamaroneck and other communities are in immediate proximity. If there is a fire in one of those communities, mutual aid is coming from the next door community in a matter of minutes to cover a portion of the community that can't be covered because that local community's fire resources are fully deployed to fight the specific fire. That's mutual aid that's a town away, maybe 2 towns away. This mutual aid comes 500 and 1,000 miles away. And even if you fly in manpower, equipment that's needed, additional crews, trucks have to be driven. And it takes hours, 18 hours oftentimes, to make the 1,000-mile trip from point A to point B. That whole process has to be evaluated. How much are we relying on mutual aid to handle what amounts to be frequent instances, not the once-in-a-blue-moon type of instance that we theorize that it's a process of this. NYSEG should commit to providing liaisons to municipalities at the start of the storm restoration work rather than a few days later. These municipal individuals who are placed inside each of the different localities when they've established their emergency operations center is supposed to be the lifeline link between the municipality and the utility. The authority and power of those liaisons is relatively small in being able to get the parent company that they work for to be able to understand and reallocate resources. And in the case of NYSEG, those liaisons were not started right at the beginning of the process. And that would have meant quite a bit of difference in terms of understanding exactly what kind of a problem that they had. Much of this stuff does not particularly appear to be sexy. It's not a silver bullet. Some folks will say, bury all the lines, and that's the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. It's a series of intelligent things that have to be done. And the most important thing is to understand that for this system to work, the utilities and the local governments have to work hand in glove. Because, and I've said this a number of times, I'm sure you know this, it bears repeating. In normal circumstances, the utility workers are trained professionals. And by the way, all of us have been nothing but complimentary to the men and the women that are out there on the line doing the work every day. They performed yeoman work under pressure, both the ones that are local and the ones that came in from out of town. The criticisms we have are about the systems by which they were deployed, not their professionalism. So let's be clear, it's not an attack on the individual workers that work for these places. But a crew comes out, makes the assessment as to the tree or the impediment that's down that has taken wires with them. They must secure those wires and make sure they're not live. When the utility has performed that function, then the municipal DPW function takes the impediment out of the way, the tree, the fallen telephone pole or whatever it is, takes that out of the way. That's the municipal job. Then the utility worker's job, and usually it's a different crew. There's a crew that does a different function. The second function, the third function of this three-step process is to restore the wires and reconnect the power. It is not possible for these men and women to have their community resources available to mesh unless it meshes with what the utilities do. And so as the utilities make the determination that they will determine how to allocate their resources, that our municipal officials and our county officials have no role to play in how they allocate their resources, we have resources that are standing by waiting. And everyone has an anecdotal story about how they were prepared to do something to remove a blockage on 22 in North Castle, to wire up a section of New Rochelle, to help people in a cul-de-sac in Rye City. We know the stories because we know them personally. Each one of us were out listening and seeing those stories. So it's not a criticism that is without specifics. And what this report does is make very specific recommendations about what can be improved based on the specifics of what we all saw that day, what Kevin saw in Pound Ridge, what Dan saw in Scarsdale, what Kitley saw in Katona, what Ivy saw in Chappaqua, what every single one of us did. And I would say even to the level of state assembly and senators, Kevin and David and all the other people they represent were also out there in the community as eyes and ears of these things. And that's why this is a unique movement. This is a bipartisan, multi-level government movement that basically says we want it to change, we're willing to work to make it change, but we have to see a willingness to cooperate and to change policy. So with that, we'll open it up to any press questions, and if there's any questions from anybody else in the room, we're happy to take them. You can issue the question if David or anybody else is comfortable answering them. We'll be happy to do it. Questions from our friends in the press. Andrew?
What sense do you get that either NYSEG or Con Ed will look at the report and maybe be receptive or not receptive to the suggestions and look at it?
Well, I'll simply say they've expressed a lot of interest in seeing the report in advance, so that's hopefully a good sign. On the other hand, we had the very firm view that the people of Westchester will be able to see this report at the same time, so that what we've basically done with this report is take the frustrations of the people of Westchester that were given voice very ably by our county executive, but if you read this report, you will see the frustrations of the elected officials as time after time basic expectations were not met. I think that Con Ed and NYSEG, if they're smart, will view this as constructive feedback that they can build upon. You cannot say that the elected officials of Westchester aren't providing them a roadmap for how to improve. They're going to have this opportunity, and maybe one or both of them will avail themselves of that opportunity. Maybe they'll still maintain that all they had were communications problems and there weren't operational problems. If you read this report, yes, there are some sections on communications, and communications was a very important failure in this past March's storms. But there are many sections that are totally separate from communications, and I'd like to hopefully see that they'll change their tune after they see what we have to say.
David, can you comment on the importance of improving the communication between the utility companies and the residents who were literally left in the dark?
Yeah. In addition to the false information that was relayed through robocalls or websites and otherwise, one of the things that we convey in this report is how important it is when you're in an extended power outage to have a realistic sense of what your estimated time of restoration is. If you are simply told it will be 3 to 4 more days, you can make plans. But what happened is too often either overly optimistic or just frankly inaccurate estimated restoration times were being provided. And a crucial element of getting information to the public is also making sure that elected officials are kept up to date. Whether it's town email lists or robocalls that come out through government, or just the information that any of us are able to put out on Twitter or Facebook or through our friends in the media. If we feel that we cannot be a source of reliable information for our residents, then an opportunity has been lost by the utility companies to enlist us as partners in getting out useful information. So I definitely think that there's, was already some recognition of this, but this report goes into it all the more.
And let me just add something, and I think you can make, all of you in the media can relate to the principle behind this. I spent 20 years in a corporate position with a number of companies outside of my elected position. Whenever we had a problem in the entity that I was a representative of, we knew that we had competition down the road that would take advantage of our failure and take market share away from us. It created an urgency. And I would say that you have an urgency of scooping when there's possible news out there. You want to be the first, everybody does, to break a story. And that's an urgency that happens in your newsroom. There's an urgency that happens as elected officials. Every one of us goes before the electorate, and we have a judgment day that is ahead of us. And how we perform under pressure, how quickly we respond to an emergency is how people ultimately will judge us positively and negatively. The utilities are a monopoly. They are a corporate entity. They have talented executives at the top. I called them on resigning, but I called on them because I was angry, knowing that they're talented individuals that are experienced in their field of endeavor. It was never a question about their professionalism. It was a question of their urgency, the urgency by which you move to try to scoop and make sure you go back to your newsroom with accurate video and accurate audio and accurate information. The urgency by which we face an electorate and know that we must perform. The urgency of a business that's in the competition. That's the urgency that has to happen when we have a utility that has a monopoly. Why do we have a monopoly? Because it would be chaos to have competing entities wire to provide the same services. So wisely, we create zones of authority to deliver power. Power can be generated in a competitive way, but the delivery of the service is done through the system of monopolies. What this report says is you must respond urgently, the way a business would, the way a government would.
And I'll just add a very specific example of what George just mentioned. The one of the things we highlight, a very specific example in this report, there was one morning conference call. If it was a morning conference call, I know it must have been a Con Ed conference call, where they said on that conference call to elected officials, we know that there's something off with our website, and we will be letting the public know. By that afternoon, they still had not updated their website with even a banner that said the information here is inaccurate or so forth. And that's in part because of what the county executive just described. If you don't feel that it's urgent to get out information as quickly as possible, if you feel that if you just get it out eventually, then you're covering your bases, then you're fundamentally not serving your customer base. And we need to make sure that in every respect that if a company knows that something's wrong in the middle of an emergency situation like this, they have to let the world know. It's not a time to just focus on your public relations. It's a time to take care of the health and safety of the people you serve.
Other questions? Rebecca, do you want to follow up?
Do you plan on taking these recommendations to Albany? I mean, turning it into legislation?
So it's already, as of this afternoon, being submitted to the Public Service Commission. So the regulatory review and investigation that is going on right now will have the opportunity to take it into account. In addition, next week, next Tuesday, the 29th, the State Assembly Committees on Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions that oversees the Public Service Commission, as well as the Assembly Committee on Energy, are going to be having a public hearing here in Westchester in this very building on the 8th floor, so that we as legislators can get some of the perspective of both the utilities, but also folks who were affected. And then we'll be looking at both existing pieces of legislation and potential new pieces of legislation. Part of this is we want to, both from the public and then from the affected parties, get the reaction to our reports. And also, as a broader group, I mean, we have fantastic members of the executive committee here and our partners in the county legislature also here. But we want to have everyone provide some perspective so we can get beyond just the early recommendations and move on to more definitive things. Some of those will probably need to be legislative. But that really depends first and foremost on what do the utility companies do voluntarily, what do the regulators do, and then comes to us who are in legislators either the local, county, or state level to or federal level to take action.
Other questions? Andrew?
Just one quick question. You mentioned about the leadership with Con Ed and NYSEG. You were very emotional back then. You've had a couple of months. I was just wondering, how do you feel now about leadership at both NYSEG and Con Ed?
I'll quote President Reagan in Russian, "Doverny no provenyai," trust but verify. And I think what we do is we'll trust, but we want to verify. We want to see that there is progress being made on these areas. The test of leadership is performance, and that's true for us, and that's true for them as well. Any other questions as a group? If not, we thank you for your time. You're welcome to speak to David or any of our elected officials who are here individually, and we thank you very much for your time. I again apologize for the delay in the start of the conference. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.